Emeritus at Harvard Law School. A graduate of Brooklyn College and Yale Law School, he joined the Harvard Law faculty at the young age of 25 years old, after already clerking for Judge David Bazelon and Justice Arthur Goldberg. He's been called many things, including the nation's most distinguished defender of individual rights, the best-known criminal lawyer in the world, the top lawyer of last resort. He's also been called America's most public Jewish defender, and is Israel's single most visible defender, the Jewish state's lead attorney in the court of public opinion. In 1983, he received the William Douglas First Amendment Award from the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith in recognition of his, and I quote, compassionate, eloquent leadership and persistent advocacy in the struggle for civil and human rights. In 2007, he received the Soviet Jewry Foundation Award from the Russian Jewish Community Foundation. In 2011, he was awarded the Menachem Begin Award of Honor from the Menachem Begin Heritage Center. But Alan Dershowitz is more than just one of our country's most gifted lawyers. He's also a best-selling author. Last year, he wrote about how the criminalization of political differences endangers democracy, a topic that we've debated on this campus. His latest book, called The Case Against BDS, Why Singling Out Israel for Boycott is Anti-Semitic and Anti-Peace, showcases his voice on Middle East matters. Over his career, he's actually written more than 1,000 articles, including outlets, including academic journals, the Harvard Law Review, as well as blogs and other publications such as New York Times Magazine, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and so forth. Our discussion tonight will be moderated by Mark Maxwell, who's the Capitol Bureau Chief covering the Illinois State House for WCIA TV in Springfield, and he's also host of Capitol Connection. His first job, as was mine at about the same age, was to deliver newspapers when he was only 8 years old. After detours in healthcare and real estate, he returned to his roots in delivering the news, this time on television. Before joining WCIA, Mr. Maxwell was a news anchor and reporter for WHBT in West Palm Beach, Florida, and a producer for CSN Chicago. He's an award-winning graduate of the Illinois Center for Broadcasting and a graduate of Hyles Anderson College, where he earned his bachelor's degree. After they have had the opportunity to get the conversation started this evening, there will be opportunities for questions and comments from the audience, and I want to thank the professor for his willingness to take questions or comments on literally any issue. When that time comes, though, I will ask that we all be respectful of our guests and of others in this room. Over the past few weeks, our Chancellor, Robert Jones, has been having a series of what he calls critical conversations on campus. I want to take some of the words he used about those conversations and simply say that I hope our discussion tonight will challenge beliefs, opinions, and viewpoints through careful listening and the thoughtful expression of different voices, perspectives, and ideas. So I ask that when you come to the microphone, you say whatever's on your mind, but that we all remember that this is a place in the greatest spirit of universities for civil discourse. So we will ask that you limit your question or comment to about 30 seconds so that just out of respect for the others who are going to be waiting a turn to ask a question, and we want to get as many of those questions and comments in as we can, and there are microphones set up in the aisle to serve that purpose. So Mark, I'm now going to turn the conversation over to you. I'm sure you're going to guide us through some very interesting topics, and some really good, honest discussion will result. So let's all get ready to listen and learn. Thank you.
Team, thank you. I'm only batting leadoff here tonight. You all are batting cleanup. So if we don't cover anything, please take notes and feel free to ask that in just a moment. And of course, good evening. Tonight we hope to explore the strengths, the opportunities, the limits, and perhaps the threat or vulnerability to free speech. It's a broad topic. There's a lot to get into, especially free speech on a college campus like this one. To do that, we're going to discuss some of the more controversial flashpoint issues that Chancellor Jones and others have highlighted in recent days and we've heard in recent speeches. Some of those that struck a nerve, of course, the Stephen Salida case from years ago, the BDS movement that he mentioned there, and DACA, President Trump. We'll see if we can't mix in some current affairs, maybe even a little history along the way. So again, thank you for coming tonight. Alan Dershowitz, Professor Dershowitz, it's good to have you tonight. You're no stranger to a college campus. Of course, Harvard Law professor there. And I want to start at the beginning of this whole free speech experiment, this concept, if you will. If you can describe for us the original intent, what was the promised value of free speech when it was first drafted in the Constitution?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful campus. I've been looking forward to meeting with you and getting your questions. The answer is very simple. No one knows. The framers of the Constitution refused to enact the Constitution unless they were promised that there would be a Bill of Rights. And the first Bill of Rights says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, among other things, or of press, or of assembly. But of course that was intended only to apply to Congress. It was not intended to apply to the states. And at the time of framing, many states had libel and sedition, other kinds of laws prohibiting the freedom of speech. But even if you look at the federal government, within a decade of the Bill of Rights being enacted and the First Amendment being enacted, Congress made a law prohibiting freedom of speech, the Alien and Sedition Act, passed under the John Adams administration. And they put people in jail. Supporters of Thomas Jefferson went to jail. And so hypocrisy over the First Amendment is as old as the First Amendment itself. And don't expect to get clear, definitive, firm answers. For most people in most parts of the world, they believe freedom of speech for me, but not for thee. They will do everything in their power to promote the freedom of speech for those who they agree with, but will do equally yeoman's work in trying to defeat freedom of speech if it offends them or upsets them. This is particularly rampant today on college campuses, where for the first time in my adult life, and I've been involved in the First Amendment for close to 60 years, first time in my adult life, serious academics are writing articles saying that free speech is not important to democracy, that free speech is part of white privilege, that free speech is part of oppression, that free speech is a way in which the dominant group subordinates other groups. Free speech today is seen as an enemy of intersectionality, which is this new highfalutin concept on academic campuses that says that all oppressed groups are oppressed by the same oppressors, and the oppressors are American, Zionist, Jews, Westernist Christianity, etc. And so I think for the first time in many years since McCarthyism, we are really having a struggle for the First Amendment. The irony is when I was in college, it was the right wing that was censoring, and the left that was demanding freedom of speech for me. Today, it's the hard left that's demanding freedom of speech for me, the hard left, but no freedom of speech for thee, conservatives, Christians, Zionists, etc. So we have a real struggle ahead of us. And what I worry about is that the students are our future, that the next generation of leaders may not have as strong feelings and sympathies for freedom of speech and its importance to democratic government.
You said we don't really know the original intent. I jotted down just a few things that might have been the outcome of this free speech experiment. Holding powerful people or governments accountable. The ability to be a dissenter. I know you had experience in defending dissenters in the Soviet Union. The power of persuasion, promising that you might have a chance to change someone's mind over civil discourse. To facilitate more of unfettered pursuit of what might be true, and that sort of intersects with academic freedom as well. And there are a few other things, but to amplify the voice of a silenced or a marginalized person that at the rebellion, that might have been the spirit of what they were after, no?
It's possible, but remember that at the framing, we did not have a democracy. A very tiny percentage of people in this country voted. You had to be white, you had to be male, you had to be a property owner. In some states, you had to be not only a Christian, but a Protestant Christian. And the idea of wanting the most marginalized to have a voice may be a later day extrapolation onto what Madison and Jefferson had in mind. Now, I think Madison and Jefferson generally believed in the marketplace of ideas. I own a letter that I was so fortunate to buy in a bookstore, written by Thomas Jefferson on the 25th anniversary of the American Revolution, of the Declaration of Independence, defending freedom of speech in beautiful, glorious terms, and making some of the very arguments you're making. And I think he believed it. On the other hand, when he became president, before he became president, he famously said, given a choice between a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I would select the latter, newspapers without a government. After he served for 4 years as president, he said people would be far better off if there were no newspapers, and if nobody ever read a newspaper, they would have more truth. He was the first one to talk about fake news.
So absolute power corrupts absolutely. It was that
Becoming a president tends to have an impact on what your feelings are about the movement.
We may get into the power of the presidency in a little bit after tonight. You touched on this in your opening remarks, but we know that the First Amendment does not only apply to the federal government. It does say Congress shall make no law. It does say that. But this is a public university. And the University of Illinois has to abide by a free speech clause. A private university, like the University of Chicago, for instance, would not have to abide by that same issue, or would not be bound by those same rules. And some people can get confused by this in online discussions or in the comments section of Facebook. So draw the line for us. What rights does a company have, a corporation, to censor free speech or offensive speech?
Well, it depends on what you mean by rights. If the question is what constitutional powers a company has, it's fairly absolute. You can't do it based on race, you can't do it based on other invidious considerations. But for example, a bar 2 days ago in New York was found not liable for throwing out a Trump supporter who was wearing a hat that said "Make America Great Again." And the bartender said, "No, people who support Trump don't belong in this bar. You're out of here." He brought a lawsuit. He lost. Because the bar is not a state action. Now, in Massachusetts, for example, they passed a statute saying Harvard University is no different than the University of Illinois because it's a big university, and it should be required to impose the same freedom of speech that a public university. So that's a matter of state law. So it really depends state by state on statute.
We also saw an example today from Capitol Hill. Two women, they go by Diamond and Silk online. Some of you may know them. Facebook apologized. They're two conservative black women. They're from North Carolina. Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg apologized for what they said was inappropriate censorship, warning viewers online that their behavior or their content was somehow dangerous. Is this something that the First Amendment addresses?
Well, I am now a subject of a lawsuit about that. I'm not bringing the suit because I'm ambivalent myself about the suit. But a lawsuit is being brought against YouTube because YouTube listed several films that I made, 5-minute films for somebody called Prager, Dennis Prager. I made 5-minute films, and in one film, I talk about Israel's right to exist as a nation state between people because it has a legitimate birth certificate. It was born by the pen, not by the sword. And I go through the whole history of the establishment of Israel. It didn't seem to be anything particularly offensive about it, but YouTube said nobody under the age of 18 can see that film. It was ranked along with pornography and other kinds of things. So I didn't bring the lawsuit, but Prager has brought the lawsuit. I will almost certainly be called as a witness. And one of the questions is whether or not YouTube, Google, Facebook, you name it, have become so big that they're public utilities, that they're like taxi cabs. And the taxi cab can't refuse to pick you up if you pay for Uber, we'll have to sue. We're at the cutting edge now of these issues, and I suspect some of them will be resolved legislatively, others will be resolved by the courts, but we can't give a definitive answer.
It's impossible to really ignore the role of social media. Of course, we're looking to focus on free speech on campus, but online is where a lot of this speech, this offensive speech, is at the vehicle for it. Hashtag boycotts, viral videos, fake news. It can all travel faster, farther, and burn hotter than it used to in another era.
And there's no defamation remedy. Because if somebody defames you on the internet anonymously, then you can't find them, you can't sue the server. So if you just read some of my emails and some of the tweets about me, it's absolutely remarkable what people are allowed to say, and the marketplace of ideas has become a lot more open than it used to be. I mentioned earlier one of my favorite cartoons, The New Yorker, where it has this old man in a store that sells scrolls, and the young millennial kid comes in holding this thing called a book, and the father says, the world will never be the same again. And of course, he's right. Every technological advancement is a double-edged sword. It can produce good and it can produce evil.
Scrolling a book, the speed difference there is not nearly as exponential as the internet, though. The point still stands.
In those days, when you had the press, Gutenberg press, which could produce a book very quickly instead of a handwritten scroll, it seemed to people then like the change was probably what it seems to people now, the change brought it out from this.
If the First Amendment, the right to free speech, if that right came with a right of everyone's voice being equal, everyone having a voice, the right to respond, if we assume that, then are we skipping over? Well, let me start over. There's this old phrase that it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Are we short-circuiting that project of going through the rigorous debate process of having to vet ideas in a classroom or hear other ideas and develop that confidence in your destination?
I think so, and I think it's coming from many sources. I think on college campuses today, you have groups like the ones who are out there protesting that have these kind of simple-minded slogans. United States out of the Middle East. Duh. There's no sign that says Russia out of the Middle East. Clearly it's one-sided, simple-minded sloganeering. Nobody wants you to think about it. They want you to just react emotionally. That's from the left. And then on the right, you have Donald Trump, who has done more to eliminate kind of political discussion at the very top and to substitute for it cliches like fake news and names for people, Crooked Hillary and lying this and lying that. Those are not invitations to political discourse. Those are invitations to conclusory name calling. And I think that both the hard left today and President Trump have weakened and forcing dialogue and
for political gain.
Sometimes for political gain, sometimes just because that's who they are and that's what they do. I'm sure that's what President Trump was doing when he was in business. I'm not sure he gained. What he said today on television and the calls on Fox didn't sound to me like he gained anything politically. You certainly heard his lawyer's legal case. You may have heard his own legal case. I think he just was impulsive. It was on his mind. And he wanted to say it. And I think the internet does that. Because people send out tweets and send out emails and send out messages that they ultimately regret. Or even worse, send out pictures of themselves in compromising positions. And they just do it. So I'm not even sure it's calculated political game. We just live in a world where it's much easier to get something. I'll give you an example. My wife is here with me today, and she and I work together on a lot of my articles. So I'll think of an article. Maybe I'm on a plane, and I'll write it out, or I'll dictate it down much faster than I am. And the time between the time I got the idea and the time it appears online in multiple publications can be as little as an hour. And that's really different. When I used to write articles for the New York Times, you'd write the article, edit it, send it in. The editor would come back and give you suggestions. You'd send it back again, and then 3 or 4 days later, it would appear. Today, it's
You mentioned President Trump's interview on Fox and Friends this morning. And you may be aware of this, but can we all assume that he said he didn't help himself when he acknowledged that, in fact, Michael Cohen, his personal lawyer, took care of that, quote, Stormy Daniels thing for him. This was a a settlement of $130,000 that occurred just days before the 2016 presidential election. In your view, does that change? I know you've been to the White House just a few times in the last week or two, correct?
I was in the White House for 2 days, about 10 days ago, working on the Middle East peace process with staff members in the White House who were charged with trying to bring the Israelis and the Palestinians together. I've been working on that. I've written 6 books on the Middle East, so they were looking for my input. Then the president invited me to dinner in the residence with a group of other people. But once he started talking about his legal issues, I was politely asked to finish my dessert and leave so he could have his confidential lawyer-client communication.
But the president's
I'm not his lawyer,
yeah,
and I'm not going to be his lawyer.
You've said you're not his lawyer. You said you're not going to be his lawyer. The president, though, is a rather resourceful man. He likes to have conversations and see what assets may be available to him. Was there ever an offer, a discussion? Was there ever anything raised?
Ever disclose whether anybody asked me to be his lawyer or her lawyer. I can say that if asked, I will decline. I want to feel free to criticize President Trump as I have today and as I will continue to do. I want to continue to criticize his policy on immigration, his travel ban, his outrageous statement that we ought to have more people from Norway in this country, which was veiled racism. Because Norway has one thing that distinguishes them from other people, and that is color of their skin. I want to feel free to criticize the president, vote against him as I did when he got to office, while at the same time defending his rights, defending all of our rights, defending civil liberties, railing against the excesses of prosecutors, as all civil libertarians should do. I wouldn't have that power if I were his lawyer. I wouldn't be free to criticize him. I wouldn't be free to say what I think. I would be bound by lawyer-client conflict, and I don't be bound by that.
To be clear, lawyer-client privilege is not the grounds on which you're saying you can't answer that question.
No, I'm saying as a lawyer, I would never answer the question if somebody asked me to be his lawyer, because if I said no, then I would have to say yes next time it happens.
And you're saying you don't want to be critical of him, but with respect, there are other people, Lindsey Graham, for instance, the president of France, Macron, who have been rather publicly critical of the president, but also been increasingly involved in his orbit and seeking to influence him.
Well, I seek to influence him. Of course, I want to influence him. I want to influence him on the Middle East. I would love to influence him on the environment. It's not going to happen. I would love to influence him on the travel ban. Maybe I did a little. I did meet with him months ago and told him that the first travel ban I didn't think would necessarily survive constitutional attack. And that if he did the following things, there would be a better chance for it to pass muster. The Supreme Court just the other day seems to have validated what I said. So of course I want to have influence on him. The way I wanted to have influence on President Obama, I met with him a number of times, President Clinton, repeatedly. I would love to have influence on every president in the case of the Middle East, so that shouldn't surprise anybody.
Let's circle back to this issue of Israel and Palestinian relations. In 2014, I believe it was, Stephen Salida was on his way. He was a tenured professor at University of Illinois. I believe he was preparing to accept an offer here at University of Illinois, and then there were a series of rather harsh tweets about Israel that he put online, and that job offer was rescinded. There was later a settlement for $875,000 to pay back in compensation for economic damages under a different administration, but it happened here at the U of I and got national attention. Did the U of I there open the door to some other to inviting this sort of heckler's veto, or by taking a political stance there? What was that the university taking a political stance there?
Well, I don't know enough about that particular case to say that. I'm told that one of the reasons they withdrew their offer was because of the instability and the kind of discussion we had. For me, as a person with a university background, I would not fire a university professor for what he said outside the classroom, so long as in the classroom she was objective. I believe academic freedom outside the classroom is very different from inside the classroom. I don't think any professor has the right to use the lectern as a propaganda vehicle. There's a tape of a woman at the Modern Language Association years ago saying every professor in this room ought to use every class in the Modern Language Department to support the rights of the Palestinians and oppose Israel. And another person saying The same in mathematics. No. When you're a professor, your job is to teach students how to think about what to think. And particularly if you have a capital audience, and departments should not be taking positions or stances on controversial political issues. But unless there were arguments that his scholarship was deficient or his teaching was biased, I don't think I would have withdrawn his offer just on the ground that his tweets were politically wrong or his statements were not civil. I think that's part of the marketplace of ideas. I would think that people here would be smart enough to reject him on the marketplace of ideas. His ideas belong in the garbage pail of history, and that's where he's ended up, the garbage pail of history. Nobody wants to go near him. But I think the university, on balance, probably does.
The local newspaper, the News Gazette, uncovered through the Freedom of Information emails that showed that big donors to this school applied significant pressure ahead of his ouster, and they wanted to get rid of him. Many of these were donors from the Jewish community. What message do you think that sends to the rest of the professors still on campus today?
Well, remember, the university is not just the current student body. The university is broader than that. It includes the alumni. I'll give you an example. My son went to Hampshire College. He notified me that Hampshire College faculty had voted to divest only from Israel. No other country, just Israel. I called up the president of the university. I was a minor donor, okay? But I was a small donor. And I said, we're going to fight fire with fire. If you divest from Israel, I will organize all the alumni to divest from you. And we will stop contributing to the university. And he took the threat seriously. And he begged me not to do it. And he announced publicly that they would not in any way enforce the divestment. Let me be very clear about where I stand on BDS for 1 second. I am not opposed to a boycott, divestment, sanction, movement. Movement. What is a movement? A movement is something that's universal. If there were a BDS movement, it would rank every country in the world in order of how serious their human rights violations were. So, it would rank Cuba, and China, and Russia, and Belarus, and Syria, and Iran. And eventually we get to Israel, about 188 states. And then it would rank every country in terms of what access the victims of their human rights violations have to the judiciary, to the media. The same ranking, except Israel there would be 215th out of 216, that has one of the best judiciaries and open media in the world. That's not what BDS does. BDS is an anti-Semitic, immoral tactic that says, how do we destroy Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people? Let's have a tactic. We'll call it BDS. We'll apply it only to Israel. There's a name for that. It's called bigotry. To me, BDS is no different than refusing to rent an apartment to a black person or a gay person, or refusing to bake a cake for a gay person. It's simple bigotry. And let's remember, BDS doesn't operate against all Israelis. It's not a national movement. Only Jewish Israelis. It exempts Arab Israelis and Muslim Israelis from the BDS movement. It is anti-Semitic to its core, and it's anti-peace. Let me tell you why it's anti-peace. There will soon be a proposal from the White House for a two-state solution. The Israelis will probably accept it, I hope. The Sunni Arabs will probably accept it. The Palestinians may very well reject it because they think that those phonies sitting outside are going to help them get a state. BDS is not going to help the Palestinians get a state. BDS doesn't help the Palestinians. It results in unemployment of Palestinians who work in places like SodaStream on the West Bank. That's why the Palestinian Authority doesn't support BDS. These, local phonies who think they know more about the Middle East than the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian Authority does not support BDS. It doesn't support the boycott limited and exclusively applied to Israel. But these guys think they're going to bring about peace, and they're just dead wrong. I support free speech. I support their right to tell their lies. and I support my right to call them lies. But I don't support their right to use the kind of economic discrimination that the Nazis used against the Jews in the 1930s when they boycotted Jewish stores, that the Arab boycott of 1946 used against Jewish store owners, Jewish filmmakers, and other Jews. That to me is bigotry. Anybody who supports the BDS movement should be killed.
Seems you have a rather stark disagreement with the protesters outside.
No, I agree with their right to protest.
Well,
with the substance.
with the substance. And in a two-page piece of paper that they handed out on the way in here, I stopped and talked with a few of them, and it says in bold on the bottom of the second page, BDS is not immoral, it is not anti-Semitic, and they make this point. They're probably aware that you would say something like that. So I guess.
But remember too, when Goebbels announced the boycott move for the Jews, he said the reason it's not immoral, because it's not anti-Semitic. It's just that Jewish store owners have far too much influence in Germany. They're destroying our culture. They're occupying our land, etc. Just because somebody says something is not immoral doesn't make it so.
You said that it would result in unemployment.
That's right.
But does it also result in unemployment as a matter of foreign policy? I know this is an interest of yours. Does it also result in unemployment when the United States government boycotts or sanctions places like North Korea, like Russia, like Cuba, like Venezuela?
As I said, I think sanctions are a legitimate tool, and I think sanctions against Israel would be a legitimate tool if it were done in order of how serious the violations are. The United States does that. North Korea is a horrible, horrible offender of human rights, probably the worst in the world. Iran is probably second. It's no accident those are two countries that we majorly sanction. Cuba was among them. It's getting a little better, so we've eliminated most of the sanctions.
You think this is solely about human rights? Is there any other common thread between those nations that you see I just listed?
Well, two of them have, one of them has a nuclear arsenal, the other is trying to get a nuclear arsenal. They are obviously enemies of the United States. What else?
So in terms of national security or the ability to pose a threat to.
That's very important. I mean, the way in which the United States got Iran to at least slow down its rush toward the nuclear arsenal is by imposing sanctions. Sanctions are better than war. A quarantine is better than an invasion. And I think one has to look in a calibrated way at the weapons that are available. Look, would you ask me, is BDS against Israel better than terrorism against Israel? Yes. Yes, I'd much prefer to see enemies of Israel employ BDS than blow up synagogues and blow up airplanes. That doesn't make it good. It makes it just less worse than the other alternative.
Some would argue that it's also a tool to bring people to a negotiating table. An example would be the Stephen Salida case.
Well,
when donors threatened to boycott, right, just to play this out, and they applied economic pressure here at Dubai, wasn't that an effective boycott? Can't you sometimes produce results through that avenue?
I think that produced results, but bring it to the bargaining table. So BDS is now in full pledge against Israel. Have the Palestinians come to the bargaining table? No. Has Israel indicated a willingness without any preconditions to come to the bargaining table? Yes. So it's worked in reverse. BDS has told the Palestinians that they don't have to make compromises to get peace. That BDS, that the International Criminal Court, that the UN will give them a state without them having to make compromises. That is absurd. The Egyptians agree with that. The Jordanians agree with that. Almost all sentient people agree that the Palestinians will not get a state unless they come to the bargaining table. My mother's favorite story was about Shlomi. Shlomi was 79 years old. Every day he prayed to God. He said, God, before I turn 80, I want to win the New York lottery. I have prayed to you every day. Please let me win the New York lottery. Every day he prays. On his 80th birthday, he rails at God. I'm 80. I haven't won the New York lottery. Why? Why? God looks down and says, help me out a little, Shlomi, buy a ticket. So the Palestinians haven't bought a ticket. They have never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. They could have had a state in 1937 with the Peel Commission. In 1947 with the UN partition, which partitioned Palestine into two states, one for the nation state of the Jewish people, one a nation state for the Palestinian Arabs. They rejected it and engaged in a genocidal war. They could have had a state in 67, land for peace. 242, they went to Khartoum and they said no peace, no negotiation, and no recognition. They could have had a state in 2001 when Ehud Barak and Bill Clinton offered them 97% of the West Bank, 100% of the Gaza Strip, a capital in Jerusalem, on and on and on. And the response was an intifada and 4,000 people were killed. So don't tell me that BDS is going to help bring anybody to the negotiating table. It's an alternative to negotiation, not a way of bringing people to the table.
And sanctions bring Iran to the negotiating table with this administration, with the Obama administration?
It brought them to the negotiating table because it was sanctions that were ethically and morally and universally directed. They were Britain, France, many of the other countries, and it was an alternative to a military attack. So I'm not saying to you again that sanctions can't work. I'm saying to you that sanctions directed at one country, the only democracy in the Middle East, the nation state of the Jewish people, a country who in 70 years has saved more lives per capita than any country in the history of the world, a country that has contributed more to the welfare of the world in 70 years than any comparable country, a country that has taught the world how to fight terrorism without compromising civil liberties, a country that has done so much for the health and welfare and technology of the world. To focus sanctions only on that country and not to sanction, for example, Hamas, or the Palestinian Authority, or Syria, Assad, or any of the other countries, can't be explained in any other way but anti-Semitic bigotry. That's its history, that's who its grandparents are, that's who its godparents are, and that's what it is.
The question, it also seems, is this is obviously a very controversial issue globally. I mean, we're talking about war or averting war. Is one of the promises of free speech that a value or a commitment to debate, to diplomacy that seeks ways to avert war? And when you say the Palestinians never picked up that check or picked up that opportunity, do you feel that there are too many people shouting past each other on this topic and not sitting down to really talk it out?
No, I think the Palestinians made a decision in 1970 at Munich, or right after that their best route to statehood was terrorism. Was killing innocent Israeli athletes at Munich, blowing up synagogues, and it worked. It got them attention. I wrote a book called Why Terrorism Works. And it works because people give into it. But the whole world had said back then, we will never, never give in to a terrorist command. We will never free anybody, no matter what you do. I think terrorism will stop. But we give in to terrorism. Terrorism has proved its success. The Palestinian tactic has been terrorism. You have to praise the Palestinian Authority. Its leadership has rejected terrorism. So it pays ransom to the families of terrorists who kill Jews and Israelis. Nonetheless, it itself doesn't promote it. And so even small benefits are to be praised. But I don't think that BDS is going to get the Palestinians their state. They're going to get their state by compromise. Israel has to compromise. Both sides have to compromise. Everybody knows what the two-state solution should look like and will look like. You can only get both sides to negotiate.
Give us the contours of that. You said you were in the White House talking about this very topic, and in a previous speech earlier at the College of Law and College of Business, you said that you heard 3 really good ideas. Well, what are the best 3 ideas you've heard that might work?
I'm not free to disclose the content of my conversation in the White House. I can tell you what I think the solution should look like. There should be a Palestinian state, disarmed, without an air force, without tanks, without weapons of war.
Disarmed to what extent? RPGs, rifles?
So that it can only combat terrorism and criminality, a police force and militia, but no...
But to a much lower degree than the Israeli military.
Oh, no, it's not even close. It's like the Germans after the Second World War. When a country is conquered and continues to want to fight, you don't let it rearm. That was a terrible mistake in the First World War. The Versailles Treaty demanded that Germany be disarmed. Germany disregarded it, became the most powerful country in Europe, and murdered 60 million people as a result. So Israel, and by the way, Abbas agrees with this. This is not dispute.
He's ready to lay down weapons, disarm.
Not disarm, to have a demilitarized. The difference between arms and military. Militarization means an Air Force, tanks, rockets. Arms mean machine guns, armored vehicles that can prevent terrorism. Everybody in the military knows the difference between a demilitarized state and a disarmed state. What Israel is demanding, and what Abbas has agreed to, is a demilitarized state. Palestinians would have the vast majority of the West Bank. The Gaza, nobody knows what's going to happen there. It depends on what the people of Gaza want. If they want to continue to have Hamas that doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist, they're not going to have peace with the Israelis. But they will have a capital in Jerusalem. There will be a symbolic right of return, and the Palestinians can live in peace and thrive. And the peace dividend for Palestinians would be enormous. It would be multiplied from many European countries, and Palestinians could have one of the greatest economies in the world.
Do you think President Trump, bring that negotiation? Trump can bring that all the way to the finish line?
I think that time is right for that. I think both countries benefit enormously. I think the new players are the Sunni Arabs that are opposed to the Shia crescent that now starts in Iran, goes to northern Iraq, Syria, and goes to Hezbollah in Lebanon. I think the Sunnis are terrified of a nuclear-armed Iran, and so they're in favor of peace, and I think the elements are in place for possible peace. I mean, I've asked the following questions, and hypothetically. No matter what you think of Trump and what he's done for force of dialogue, etc., what will be his legacy if he continues along those lines, but manages to disarm North Korea, prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, and brings about peace between the Israelis and Palestinians? It will be a very interesting mixed legacy, much like President Obama. President Obama's legacy is very mixed. He was one of the great, in my view, domestic presidents, and one of the worst foreign policy presidents in modern history. He opened up the door in Syria to the Russians. He destroyed America's credibility abroad. He didn't have a foreign policy. He had a foreign ideology, and you can't govern by ideology. So, whenever they have these lists of great presidents, they're phony lists. Most presidents have mixed legacy, strong in one area, weak in other areas. I think we're seeing with President Obama, a president who's very strong domestically and very weak, although we won't know about these problems.
One other campus issue that might tie in with this issue of where we rank presidents is this recent surge to tear down monuments, statues, symbols, flags. Saw this in Charlottesville and other places around the country. Give us your view on that, and where does that lead?
Well, first of all, it's selective. Nobody has talked about changing the name of Malcolm X Boulevard. Malcolm X was a horrible bigot, racist, and criminal. And there should be no street named after Malcolm X. But it's the major street in Harlem. Nobody's talking about changing that. Nobody's talking about changing Arthur Godfrey Boulevard in Miami Beach. Arthur Godfrey was the one who didn't allow Jews to move into Miami Beach above 5th Street. I mean, there are so many people with horrible legacies. I don't believe in taking down monuments. I believe in putting up plaques on monuments, explaining the history, putting them in historical context, giving an opportunity to say negative things about them, perhaps moving them from the center of town where they're honored into monument parks and museums where they can be like Madame Tussauds. Madame Tussauds, has great people and horrible people. And I don't think we want to rewrite history by destroying monuments. First of all, we don't destroy great art. And some of these monuments are very good art. The Taliban is great art. I don't think we want to be in the business of destroying art. But for me, the most important thing is if you start down this road, you must have a single standard. There can't be one standard for black people, one standard for white people, one standard for Jews, one for Gentiles, one for women, one for men, one for Democrats, one for Republicans. You have to have a single set of standards that apply equally to all historical monuments and historical events. History can't have affirmative action. Universities can and should, but there's no room for affirmative action in this real institution.
You mentioned moments ago about the president's interview on Fox and Friends this morning, and it was interesting that many people, many observers, are increasingly interested in your role in the president's sphere of influence there. It was, I believe, the day or the day after FBI raided the office of the president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, that you had dinner, was it, with the president that very night?
Complete coincidence. I had been invited about a week earlier to do the Middle East stuff, and it just happened to be that night that the dinner was scheduled.
You've been vocal on cable networks about the powers of the president. I want to explore that a little bit. If we back up to the Watergate era, the Department of Justice authored a memo which has kind of guided a lot of current thought that was re-examined during the Clinton administration as well. But it basically says a sitting president cannot be indicted. And a question that a sitting president. So put us on a timeline for us. If actions were committed before a person was inaugurated, can a sitting president be indicted, based criminal indictment, not civil suit, criminal indictment for actions committed before taking office?
The answer is crystal clear. No one knows. Nobody thought of that.
But I'm sure
There's
you have an
nothing in
opinion.
the debates about it. What's clear in the Constitution is that if the president is impeached for bribery, treason, or other high crimes or misdemeanors, he can't be prosecuted for those crimes until he is impeached and removed. Then he can be prosecuted for those crimes. But there's no indication anywhere in the historical record about whether a sitting president can be indicted for crimes that he may have committed before he became president, or whether he can be indicted but not tried, and the indictment is held up until after he leaves office. These are areas that we don't know. We don't know whether the president can pardon himself. Nobody ever thought of these questions at the time of the framing, and we have to just extrapolate, and it will be up to who's on the Supreme Court.
If we use the Clinton case as an example, there's only really two examples of Clinton case. The Clinton case, it was the civil case that tripped him up with Paul Jones. Proposed there, you recommended or advised the president and his lawyers not advise him to submit to being deposed.
Well, I don't advise the president. I go on television and say what I think.
That's how a lot of people advise the president.
And he can listen. Look, Bill Clinton, one of the great, rich, powerful men, hired the world's worst lawyer to represent him, a guy named Bob Bennett. Bob Bennett walked him into a perjury trap. He had him testify about his sex life. I have to tell you, I told the president not to, and President Clinton, and
President Clinton, not President Trump.
President Clinton. I told it to him on television, and then later told it to him in person. And he testified, and that's what got him impeached. A person like President Clinton or President Trump should never be willing to testify about the sex life. That's a good start, because on deposition you can be asked anything, going back 20, 30 years.
You said that this president, President Trump, might perjure himself in that situation. It sounds that's not
What
really
I said was
endorsement
you
of
can
his
commit perjury
character.
by telling the truth. If you say something and somebody else says the opposite, and you're telling the truth, and the prosecutor chooses to believe the other person, you could be indicted for perjury. That's why in 53 years of practice, I have never allowed a client to testify, to speak to a prosecutor, and I've been pretty successful. And I'm sure I will end my career not allowing any of my clients to testify or speak to the prosecutor. No prosecutor wants to help you by having you testify. The goal is to hurt you. If you don't believe me, Mr. Comey. What Comey said in his book when they asked him, why did he draft an exoneration letter before they even interviewed Hillary Clinton? He said, oh, the interview doesn't matter. We've already made our mind up before we interviewed the subject. We only interviewed the subject to see if they're going to lie or tell the truth. So it's so clear that interviewing the subject, whether before a grand jury or in a less formal interview, is largely a perjury trap, and no good lawyer, unlike Bob Bennett, would allow his client to walk into such a case.
And we're still talking about a civil case that could trigger impeachment. If there was
No, the civil
right?
case can't trigger impeachment.
But if someone was to perjure themselves in a deposition, not a
Perjury
civil case.
can be a high crime. Yeah.
So Stormy Daniels' lawyer, Michael Avenatti, he feels confident now that after this morning's interview, that the president is
He
more
feels
likely.
confident the day he wakes up in the morning. Everything that happens, you've made my day.
So let's take
this
his
is a
feelings
gift
out of
from
it.
heaven. I think maybe a little bit of crying wolf.
is affecting his credibility.
Is there any change, though, in the actual dynamic of the likelihood of the president to have to be deposed? Will a court be more likely to say, yes, he should be deposed because of the statements he made this morning on television?
First of all, the president doesn't have to be deposed because he can settle the case. He can pay money. President Clinton, by simply bringing a certified check for $750,000 to the clerk of court, wouldn't have to testify. And I called his lawyer, Bob Bennett, after he testified. And said, what were you thinking? Why didn't you just walk the money over to the courthouse, pay the $750,000? I said, did you tell the president that you had the option of not testifying? He said, no, I didn't. I said, you didn't tell the President of the United States. He was a lawyer, graduate of Yale Law School. All right, not Harvard, but still, Yale Law School. You didn't tell the President that he had the option not to testify about his sex life if he paid $750,000, which could have raised in 2 minutes. Donor? No, I didn't tell him that. I didn't think that would be a good move for him to make, because then other women would come forward. Mr. Bennett, have you ever heard of the statute of limitations? All those cases are gone. No, he didn't advise the President that way. The President testified, one of the grounds.
So I want to keep this clear, that's a civil case, and as it relates to President Trump, this was Stormy Daniels issue. But with Special Counsel Mueller, this is a criminal investigation, and it's very different. We talked briefly.
He may not have to testify in a criminal case either.
Correct. But we talked earlier about what are the boundaries of executive immunity, how far does that go? I guess a hypothetical question here, but in the president's own words, as president, could he face criminal indictment, or could he get away with literally shooting someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue? Could he, as you said on that Access Hollywood tape?
Let me tell you why he couldn't get away with shooting somebody in Fifth Avenue. He could be committing a state crime, not a federal crime. And he could be prosecuted in the state. And he couldn't pardon anybody, including himself. So he is vulnerable to state prosecution. And there are investigations going on in the state now. And I think the great vulnerabilities are the state prosecution or federal prosecution or charges for things that happen before it's confessed.
That's a bizarre scenario, but something more literal, and we'll borrow again from the Nixon example. Would it be a state violation or federal if perhaps President Trump were to order someone to steal the alleged Comey tapes if they exist? Could the president also order that person to destroy those tapes?
That would be a clear obstruction of justice and an impeachment without a doubt. That's what Nixon.
Could the president pardon the person if that person got caught doing it?
Well, president couldn't be impeached or prosecuted for the act of pardon, but he could be for telling or conspiring as a person to destroy. What Nixon did is he told Haldeman and Ehrlichman to lie to the FBI. That's a crime. It's called suborning perjury. He then ordered hush money to be paid to the burglars. That's a crime. He then, we think, destroyed tapes. That's a crime. Firing Archibald Cox is not a crime. Firing Comey is not a crime. The president has complete authority to do that. So you have to distinguish between presidential acts, pardoning, firing, telling who to investigate and not to investigate, and acts that are in and of themselves criminal, destroying evidence, tampering with witnesses, those are.
Just to be clear that I understand what you're saying, you said it would be an impeachable offense,
Right.
as obstruction of justice.
Right.
But is it something that he could face indictment as president?
He could, but he'd have to be tried after he's left the presidency.
That would have to take place after. Right. Something else that we've seen, and perhaps we can relate this to the Middle East issue again, but the Supreme Court, as you mentioned earlier, is looking favorably on travel bans.
No, you have to distinguish between looking favorably. I'm sure there's not a single justice who's looking favorably on the travel ban. The question is, are they looking unconstitutionally at it? There's a big difference. I don't believe the travel ban, as currently written, is unconstitutional. I wish it were. I hate it. I think it's a terrible, terrible ban. But to go back to Elena Kagan's question yesterday, it's a very tough question. Kagan asked the lawyer for the government, what if you had a virulently anti-Semitic president? She said, I'm not talking about Trump. What if you had a virulently anti-Semitic president who said, I'm going to ban only Jews from Israel? Would that be constitutional? It's a very hard question. Of course, one historical answer is exactly what happened in the 20s. In the 20s, Jews were banned. That's why somebody was killed in the Holocaust in the 20s. There were quotas. The quotas weren't against Jews. They were against Poland and against Lithuania and in favor of Norway. And the result was, the impact was, that Jews could immigrate to this country, or to Cuba, South America, and other countries. But the reality is that unless you can make a really stretched establishment clause that keeping Israeli Jews out of America impacts my rights as an American, somehow, under the Establishment Clause, the Israeli Jew has no rights under the Constitution. Anybody trying to become an American citizen cannot claim constitutional rights. I mean, hypothetically, well, this is an even more interesting thing.
That's a divided issue, though, is it not? Well, that's a matter of some debate.
I'm not sure. I think
On the free flow of persons across borders.
Huh?
On the free flow of persons.
That's not a constitutional right. If a person, say, a man living in Saudi Arabia, has never been in America, has no family in America, has nobody in the university, he looks at a travel brochure and says, I like this place. I want to come here. He has absolutely no right. None, zero. Now, the question is, does somebody else have a right to have him come here? So, for example, universities have sought standing under the travel ban, saying you're depriving us of great scientists and engineers. I wouldn't be surprised if this university may have done that. You have some of the greatest scientists, particularly computer scientists, from China and other places, maybe from the Middle East. So that's a plausible argument. But no person who is not an American or has a connection to America has a right to invoke the Constitution to come to this country. There are other ways of framing the arguments, but if you put the argument starkly that way, the answer is no. So the other question is, even if a person doesn't have the right, does the United States government have the power to discriminate? And that's a different question. And that's something that's what we consider.
Under Justice Kagan's hypothetical president in this example that she used, might that president say that in the Golan Heights or in Gaza there's violence occurring there, therefore it's a national security issue, people there are not permitted to enter the country?
That's what the answer was, basically. The answer was yes, if there was. And, the United States has imposed State Department advisory saying Americans shouldn't travel to various countries. Those are the So the right to travel is not a right that's recognized by international law generally. Europe recognizes it within the European Union, and other countries and groups do recognize it, but it's not.
That's what drives a lot of the interest in the Middle East peace process is this issue before. If I could raise a rather, I suppose, inflammatory sign that was held by a protester outside. So refer to you as a warmonger.
I'm a warmonger,
right? But I interviewed a Middle Eastern correspondent some time ago who she had spent time in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and there was this diplomatic process that was starting to crumble. And I asked her what happens when the leaders there stop talking. She had a rather ominous reply. She said bombs start falling. In that area, in that region of the world, that does seem to be a tinderbox there, right? It seems to be that something can spark very quickly when people stop talking. So, in your view, in that particular area of the world, why is it so important that we all, on both sides, extremes, right, left, everyone come together to have that difficult conversation?
So if you listed the 10 most volatile issues in the Middle East, the 10 most volatile issues, Israel wouldn't make the list. The Israel-Palestine conflict wouldn't make the list. You get first the Sunni Shia conflict. That's the major thing that's creating conflict. Second, the Arab non-Arab conflict. You have two non-Arab Muslim countries, Iran and Turkey, both of which are resurgent and want to dominate the Middle East. Then you would have there are so many other issues. The Syrian conflict. Within Syria, the Alawite Syrian conflict. Russia's involved. Let me put my answer a little bit different. If Israel decided suddenly to pack up and move to Mars and set up a colony, probably they'd find a Chabad rabbi if they got there to welcome them. But if they decided to move to Mars, and in fact, if all Jews decided to move to Mars, the Middle East would be more, not less violent. More, not less violent. Israel is a source of stability in the Middle East, not a source of tension, even with the Israel-Palestine conflict. Even with the Israel-Palestine conflict. Don't believe me on this one. Talk to Saudis, talk to the Emirates, talk to Qatar, talk to Bahrain, talk to Jordan, talk to Egypt. They will all tell you that Israel is a major source of stability. Because if not for Israel, Iran would be doing what Iraq tried to do when they invaded Kuwait. Israel is the source of stability in the Middle East today. It is the democracy. It is the economic superpower. And whatever else you have to say, you have to give this country enormous credit, starting with nothing, with 600,000 Holocaust survivors, basically, with 1 million people from Northern Africa who had to leave everything behind to build itself into a country like that, imperfect as it is. And I'll tell you something interesting. This is a name-dropping story, but Carolyn and I were having dinner with Bill and Hillary Clinton in Martha's Vineyard during the last year of his presidency when Bibi Netanyahu had just gotten elected. And one of the guests at the dinner was railing against Netanyahu, and Bill Clinton said, no, let me explain. He went through a whole thing. And he said, the problem with Israel is that it's a democracy. Damn it. And everybody said, what do you mean? It's a democracy. Damn it. He said, it's very simple. If I want Jordan to do something, I call the king. It's done. If I want Egypt to do something, I call Mubarak. It's done. If I want the Saudis to do something, I call the Shah. It's done. I call the Israelis. I say, do something. They say, well, first I have to consult with the Security Cabinet. Then I have to consult with the big cabinet. Then the bigger cabinet. Then I have to put it to a vote in the Knesset. Then I have to do a poll. Then maybe a referendum. It's a democracy. You know, people say, why is Israel moved to the right? Very simple. Because they admitted 1 million Russians, 1 million Soviet Jews who lived under the yoke of communism for years and years and years. And when you bring 1 million people who live under the yoke of communism to a country, they're not going to be Bernie Sanders supporters. They're going to be anti-communist. And they're going to be anti-leftist. And they're going to be conservative. So the people, my former student, my friend, Natalie Portman, what does she want to do? Does she want to send the Russians back? If she sent 1 million Russians back, Israel would move to the left. Does she want to take away their vote? No. It's a democracy, damn it. And a democracy, you have to listen to people. And the people sometimes make the right decisions. Look at our country. And sometimes make the wrong decisions. But judge them by the principles of democracy. And they do very, very well.
We do want to open this up to questions. I believe we have 2 microphones down here, and we're going to do that in just a moment. Go ahead, you can get started there. Like you said earlier, we can take, it's like an AMA on Reddit, ask him anything. One question just before we get primed for this, on that topic to follow up, what do you think, how would you define the bond between Israel and the Saudis? Is it the dynamic of the enemy, my enemy is my friend? What's
There is no bond. It's an alliance of convenience. The Saudis still have rampant anti-Semitism. When I was recently in that region, the Saudis would not allow an Israeli chess player to participate in the chess tournament. When Qatar allowed an Israeli tennis player to play, the Saudis railed against Qatar, saying you're creating normalcy. So it's an alliance purely of convenience, not to be counted.
Interesting. Let's start right here with a question from the crowd.
Okay, just go ahead.
Hi, Professor Dershowitz. My name is Michael Vilker. I'm the chair of the Israel Committee at the Bad Center for Jewish Life. I'm a sophomore at the university majoring in political science, so I'm constantly, almost daily involved in these conversations about Israel, among other things. I have a question, and after that question I want to say something quickly, but the question is, how do you see the Iran nuclear deal currently, with Iran being one of the biggest existential threats to Israel, one of the biggest existential threats to stability in the region and to international peace?
Okay, so the question is about the Iran deal. And the president has 15 days to decide whether to re-sign it or to let it essentially lapse. I hope he re-signs it. I don't want the president to tear it up. What I'd like to, it's a terrible deal. I wrote a book called The Case Against the Iran Deal. It's terrible because of the sunset provisions that allow Iran to start spinning centrifuges in 8, 10, and 12 years enough to create enough material to transition from civilian to military use. So it's a green light for Iran to develop nuclear arsenal in a decade or less. In a decade, if you think of your age, just a snap of time, a little more challenging. But in any event, there is a provision of the Iran deal that I have brought to the attention of the White House, others haven't as well. The Iran deal in the prologue starts by saying, Iran reaffirms that it will never, never, under any circumstances, seek to acquire and develop nuclear weapons. If the president were to announce, we hold that part of the deal to be a central part of the deal. It is American policy, it is French policy, it is British policy, not to allow Iran ever to develop or acquire nuclear weapons. And if he can get Congress to authorize the use of whatever force is necessary to stop that from happening, he can work with the deal and use the deal to prevent Iran from developing weapons. That way, he keeps the coalition on board, and you can't snap back the sanctions anyway. So the sanctions are largely gone. There will be some sanctions, particularly banking sanctions. But I think it would be much better to focus on that part of the deal and make it an explicit part of the deal.
Yeah, also, I have a little gift from Lana Nevada. It's a little kippah.
Oh, thank you. So, I have to tell you a story about this. So I don't generally wear a kippah. I actually always carry one with me because you never know when you're going to meet a rabbi. But I don't usually wear a kippah. But some years ago, when my wife and I traveled to Paris, and I was invited to speak at the French Assembly, and it was at a time when rampant attacks were being made on French Jews who wore kippah. I spoke at that event wearing a kippah, not for religious reasons, just to show solidarity with the Jews of France. We saw recently that in Germany now, some non-Jews are wearing the kippah because of what happened to that Arab Israeli, not a Jew, an Arab Israeli, who walked in Germany wearing the kippah to see whether it was true that there was still rampant anti-Semitism, and he got beaten up, and that has caused a real commotion. So I will proudly wear this kippah every time there is an opportunity to wear it. Thank you. Wait, come on, it's a bar mitzvah kippah. Bar mitzvah, Shner Zalman. Oh, it's the rabbi's son, of course. Okay. Let's go here. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Breland Bay. I'm sorry, my name is Breland Bay. I'm the philanthropy chair of Honor the Chiefs Society. And I have a question regarding the freedom of speech and freedom of press. I was witness to. Is there any scenario where one person can follow and film another person in a public bathroom without their permission, and it be covered or excused under free speech?
No. No. Privacy, in many instances, trumps speech. You don't have the right to intrude on people's privacy, and I think that's what's called speech of location, manner, etc., etc. So if anybody tries to phone you in the bathroom, they have no business.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Hi, Professor. My name is Bud Windleborn. I just want to let you know I very much enjoyed listening to you today.
Thank you.
I wonder if you'd be willing to share with us a time when you either advised a client or some other citizen or held a public position where when you looked at it in retrospect, you were wrong.
That's a great question. Other than my first marriage, sorry. I think I have. I am having doubts now about my support for President Obama in his second term. When I think what he did in his second term, when I think of him in utter revenge and out of complete hatred, allowed the United Nations Security Council to enact a resolution that declared the Western Wall, the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, the access roads to Hebrew University and Hadassah Hospital, all to be grievously, illegally occupied territory. For me, that crossed the red line. And if I knew that President Obama was going to be doing that, I think I would have had to hold my nose a little. I don't know whether I could have voted for Romney because I strongly support a woman's right to choose. I strongly support gay rights, gun control, the environment, the entire liberal agenda. I might have had to stay on in that election. But
Professor, to follow
I'm
up.
not sure.
But that's a time when you learn something after the fact
yeah.
and realize you're wrong. Is there a time that you'd be willing to share with us where you feel like I was just wrong?
I just screwed up.
Yeah.
I'm searching for it. I think it would be a very good thing for me to be able to come up with something I did. I'll think about it, and if I think about it before the end of tonight, I'll come up. If you ask my wife that question, she'll have 2 or 3 dozen. Where are you, Carolyn?
Thank
Want to help
you.
me out a little bit?
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Professor, can you just clarify that comment you said out of complete hatred? Who did you ascribe that to? The United Nations?
No. Yes, the United Nations, but yes, Barack Obama. Barack Obama was getting even with Benjamin. There was no other rational basis for enacting that. I can see enacting a resolution that condemned Israel for its occupation. Okay, we can see that. That's understandable. I wouldn't have agreed with it. But to include the Western wall, the Jewish quarter, Hebrew University, Hadassah Hospital, pure spite. Pure spite. And as a result of that, my relationship with Barack Obama, I had a personal relationship with him. I remembered him very well as a student. I was invited to the White House to confer with him. I was invited to the White House for a state dinner in honor of Shimon Peres. I was invited to the White House repeatedly for Hanukkah dinners, etc. And now I am, I'll still shake hands with him and talk to him. But every time I see him, I let him know my views on that subject. I think that was really crossing the line. And I think the obligation of bipartisanship, I consider myself a bipartisan person, the obligation of bipartisanship is to condemn your party when they do something wrong and to commend the opposing party when they do something right. And I think that President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital was right precisely because Obama was wrong. Precisely because Obama unleveled the playing field and made it so hard for Israel to negotiate. Imagine negotiating a 2-state solution when the Palestinians start by owning the Kotel, the Western Wall. How do you have a negotiation? Israel has to get that back. They would be willing to give up everything to get that back. So you can't start a negotiation that way, which is why I think it was very important for President Trump to level the playing field, restore the status quo that was undone by Barack Obama's venomous, hateful instruction to UN Representative Samantha Power, my former student, to cast her vote to abstain rather than to the. Go ahead here.
Yeah. Hi, Professor. My name is Matt Rice. You were my first citation on a paper about J Street and free speech.
Did you get an A at least?
Yes.
Okay.
But I must say my question has nothing to do with the capacity. What are your thoughts on to get to the side of these events? The first, the masterpiece speech up.
Okay.
The second, the capacity versus services about fair share.
Okay, I'm going to just talk about the first because I don't really have it studied the second. But the first one, I think it's a phony case. Let me tell you why I think it's a phony case. You have a baker. First of all, is a cake art? I mean, you can eat it. Is it art? I don't know. But I don't think it has a high claim to art. If you look at it and you eat it, it's gone. But okay, people have the right to define art the way they want to. Okay, he said he wouldn't participate in the marrying of 2 men because that is against his Christian religion. But he would participate and make a cake for the marrying of a man and a woman, both of whom have been divorced. Right? Okay. Now, many of you are scholars of the New Testament. The New Testament explicitly, in the words of Jesus himself, prohibits remarriage after divorce. It is absolutely a core prohibition. It's called adultery. If it happens, prohibited by the 10 Commandments, etc. There is nothing in the New Testament about gay marriage, gay sex, gay law. This is selective religion. These are bigots who are just using religion as a cover for their bigotry. I'm old enough to remember when segregationists claimed they were discriminating against blacks because the Bible says that the Hamite curse applies to blacks. That's not why they were discriminating against blacks. They were discriminating against blacks because they were bigots and segregationists. Then they found something in the Bible to justify it. I think that's what's happening here too. That's not the way the Supreme Court should decide the case. The Supreme Court should take them at his word, saying this is a religious claim. I don't know how they're going to decide the case. I think they may decide it in favor of the bigots. Because today, I think freedom of religion, with several of the justices, particularly the most recent 2 or 3, trumps the claims of anti-discrimination. So, and I don't think that would be a good day for the First Amendment or a good day for religious equality.
Professor, if you'd like to follow up on his Janice first asking question, it does have an Illinois tie to it and a First
Tell me
Amendment
about
tie.
the case. I'm not sure I know about the case.
Sure. So the case, the fair share of these, of course, in 1977, the case by the Supreme Court that public.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But opt out of being a technical member while still paying those fees that pertain strictly to their collective bargaining.
Well, of course, money is fungible. So if you're paying money for one reason, another reason. Look, collective bargaining is very important. Unions are weakening in this country, unlike in England where they're strengthening. And I would like to see unions strengthened. As a liberal, I'm in favor of strong unions. On the other hand, I don't think that necessarily the union members should have to pay for political considerations they oppose. But what about a shareholder in a company? I had a case against Staples a few years ago. The owner of Staples, the CEO of Staples, didn't like the fact that the Boston Globe fired Mike Barnacle, who was a journalist. Mike Barnacle was fired for a good reason. And so I bought a share of Staples stock, and I said, I'm going to sue you guys. You can't use my money, my stocks, to effectuate your political purposes. If you can prove that if you used to advertise on the Globe because you thought it was good for Staples, you should continue to advertise. If you can prove that the firing of Barnacle hurt Staples, okay, that's one thing. But I don't see a big difference between corporations and unions, and yet the courts never, ever said that corporations, under their fiduciary duty, have no right to support. In fact, Citizens United goes the other way. So I don't know enough about it to make an advised opinion, but it's very interesting. Thank you for your question.
One follow-up to that, just quickly. Yeah, the unions say that full dues, a full due-paying member puts money towards the political, but a person who just pays their fair share, that only goes to collective bargaining, and that contribution is not political in any way. Mark Janice, an Illinois member, a state worker, argues that that's a violation of his right of association.
It's a close question. I mean, that could be decided in a way. I understand both sides of the argument.
Good evening, and thank you very much for what I've just heard you say. I want to ask, my name is Bruce Rosenstock. I'm a professor in the Department of Religion here. You and I have disagreements. Well, I have disagreements with you. You don't know me from Adam. I have disagreements with you, but on many, many things I completely agree. I ask you on behalf of our university to speak out against a law that is now in the House. It is one of the Goldwater Institute freedom of speech, campus freedom of speech laws that the Goldwater Institute has been promulgating. It's now in effect in 8 states. It may come in effect here. It creates a government oversight committee to make sure that the campuses are neutral, and also to encourages litigation in the event that students might feel that their freedom of speech has been hindered. But our university is very much, and under our new Chancellor, Chancellor Jones, has been doing some great things trying to create a climate of freedom of speech here, and we don't believe that we need the Goldwater Institute's legal initiative your voice would be a very important one. The other question I have,
Let me do one at a time.
Okay,
Too
please.
old for two questions. I'll forget the first one. On that one, I will study it. It sounds like a very reasonable request. It would be much better for universities to be able to do it on their own, to be able to monitor themselves. I'm weary of federal government or state government involvement. I think that the laws that oversee, federal government oversees how universities discipline students in the context of sexual assault has not been good for universities, has not been good for universities. Requiring universities to lower the transfer rate to a mere preponderance, which means that if there's a 50.1% likelihood that something happens, that has to prevail, which means that out of every 100 cases, 49 people are going to be innocent. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. And in general, I would like to see universities govern themselves, but I would like to study
please,
the situation.
it would be very important to have your voice on our side. The other issue that I would hope you would speak out against is a South Carolina law that is about to become law. It's a rider on their budget, and when the budget passes, it will also pass. And the law will establish the state department's definition of anti-Semitism as the state's use for the use of campuses. So a campus that has a speech code that says harassing speech is inappropriate and will be disciplined will use the State Department definition of anti-Semitism to enforce that particular code. That state definition is one that the writer of it himself says, I never intended for the state definition of anti-Semitism, which is more or less what your definition is, to be used on campuses. If it focuses on Israel only, it's anti-Semitic, that's part of the state definition. I never intended it to be used as a definition for campus speech.
That makes a good point. I think that definitions designed for one purpose should be automatically transferred to other uses on a campus in the context of free speech. I'd have to look at it again. I will study that as well and see if it's something.
Well, thank you so much for your openness to that. Thank you.
Sure.
We do have time for a few more. If we can try to keep questions quick.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Gosha Gross. I just had a quick question for you, Professor. So, you talked about BDS and how the big problem with BDS generally you see is that it singles out the country Israel as the only country. So, when I've asked this question to supporters of BDS, the response I get is, at the end of the day, the Palestinian people are people that are oppressed, and this is what they're asking for us to do. So, I'm going to support them. I'm curious your thoughts on that. And then when I countered that with something that, if that was actually the case, you would see, like in the West Bank, protests specifically for BDS, which I think is something that Noam Chomsky himself, who doesn't support BDS, has said. They said at the end of the day, there's these Palestinian Civil Union or Liberty, something along that line. A bunch of them support it. So, and the Palestinian Authority isn't an action.
Let's be very clear. The vast majority of people who support Palestinian rights don't give a damn about Palestine. They only support Palestinian rights because the alleged oppressors of the Palestinians are the nation state of the Jews. Let's be very honest about that. Because if they cared about the rights of oppressed people, they'd be on the forefront of supporting the rights of the Kurds. Nobody supports the rights of the Kurds. Not a single one of those people out there cares about the Kurds. There are many more Kurds. They have a far greater claim to statehood than the Palestinians. They are far more oppressed. They have far more democratic institutions. They are far more pro-American and pro-liberty. Nobody cares about the Kurds because their oppressors are not the nation state of the Jewish people. The Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority opposes independence for the Kurds. Talk about hypocrisy. The only country in the Middle East that supports the rights of the Kurds is Israel. So I don't want to hear about the hypocrisy. When I spoke recently, not so recently now, at the University of California at Irvine, at an audience about this size, group of pro-Palestinian people on this side, pro-Israel people on this side, I started my discussion by saying, I want to ask, how many of you on the pro-Palestinian side would support a peaceful Palestinian state, no terrorism, living side by side with Israel. Every hand went up. I then turned to the pro-Palestinian side. How many of you would support a nation state for the Jewish people, living in peace, no occupation, no settlements? Not a single hand went up. Not a single hand went up. It was very clear to everybody in that audience that this was not pro-Palestine versus pro-Israel. This was pro-Israel versus anti-Israel. If the Palestinians wanted a state, they could have had one in 37, in 47, in 67. The Palestinian goal from day one was that there not be a Jewish state in the Middle East. That's what Hussein, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, said. He said, we don't want a state for the Palestinians, we just don't want there to be a state. That view has prevailed. It's Hamas's view, it's the view of Hezbollah, it's the view of some within the Palestinian Authority, and the phonies out there who claim that they support Palestinian rights are undercutting Palestinian rights, and I'll believe them when they stand up for the rights of the Kurds, for the rights of the citizens of Syria, for the dissenters in Iran, for the dissenters in other countries around the world. These are single-dimensional haters. They hate the nation state of the Jewish people. And just because they call themselves the Jewish Voice for Peace doesn't make it kosher. Number one, they're not Jewish. Many of them are not Jewish at all. Number two, they have no voice, thank God. And number three, they have no interest in peace. Their only interest is in destroying the nation state of the Jewish people. And shame on Cynthia Nixon for signing a petition supported by Jewish Voice for Peace and signed by Vanessa Redgrave. She's going to lose for governor of New York because of Jewish Voice for Peace, because everybody knows that they say it's the largest group of Jews that support BDS. Yeah, all 13 of them support BDS because they hate Israel. And let's understand what Jewish Voice for Peace is. Don't believe me. Listen to the ADL. It is a hate organization composed of people who hate their Jewishness, who hate Israel, and who hate peace. And if you want to know my real views, I'll be happy to tell you those. But they're on the wrong side of morality. They're on the wrong side of history. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor, for coming.
Yeah. And by the way, I'd welcome questions, real questions from anybody who is supposed to speak. You have a right to ask me the hardest questions you want. So if you want to come up, I'll take the question.
I actually have two questions.
Sure.
So my first question is in regards to Alfie Evans.
To what?
Alfie Evans.
I don't know what you're talking about.
He's the baby in the UK. The parents are attempting to
Give me your next question.
All right. In regards to your point on the baker.
On what?
In regards to your point, the baker in the shop, cake.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. You said that you disagreed with the Supreme Court. What you think the Supreme Court will rule in the case that he does not have the cake. Yeah. I would argue that the baker had the right. His right to the byproduct of his labor.
What?
The byproduct of his labor.
What?
The byproduct of his labor.
Okay, but what if the baker weren't a baker? What if he were a plumber? And the plumber said, "I'm not coming to your house because I don't like black people. I'm not going to fix your toilet."
I would argue that's perfectly constitutional.
It's not, because Congress passed statutes making that illegal.
Congress has passed a multitude of laws that are not constitutional.
No, I understand that, but nobody today, I don't think there's a single justice who would lose 9 to nothing if you refuse to rent to a black person or a gay person. The only reason this case is before the Supreme Court is because he's playing when I squeeze my little squeegee on the cake, I'm creating a piece of art. And I think you have to balance that against the rights of gay people.
I understand your point. That's a good point. But I would argue that that's the point.
Okay, no, you're right. The Supreme Court has to.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the art.
Okay,
All right, we're going to move on to we have one last question here. We're going to have to end it here. I'm sorry.
If anybody from Jewish Voice for Peace wants to ask a question, I'll put you up in the front of the line. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Laura Devereaux. I'm a graduate student. I
was wondering about the current refugee situation in Israel regarding what obligations does Israel have to these people, and what do you think would be the solution to the situation?
Okay. Well, if the question about the refugees, it couldn't be more timely because 2 hours ago I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, signed by a group of distinguished Zionists in America and around the world, urging the Prime Minister to go back to the deal he had originally agreed to, which is right-wing coalition partners forced him out of doing it. I think Israel should announce, number one, it will never, ever, ever turn away a genuine asylum seeker, someone who is going to be killed or imprisoned or punished for his or her political views in their country of origin. Israel is a country of refugees, a country of asylum seekers. The Bible teaches us, be kind to strangers because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. So I think the first rule, categorical, has to be Israel never sends away an asylum. The next question is, what do you do with economic refugees who aren't asylum? Go back to their countries, they just won't earn enough money. They're much better off in Israel, and they'd like to live in Israel. No country has an obligation to take in 40,000, especially a small country like that. So what we suggested in the letter is to appoint Natan Sharansky, who is Israel's most famous asylum seeker, as chairman of a commission to evaluate every case and every category of cases, and for Israel to be extremely generous. Now, what they can't do is keep all the refugees in South Tel Aviv, because that creates a real problem. South Tel Aviv, as you know, if you've been there, other than a few fancy stores, is a relatively poor neighborhood, mostly of North African Jews, and they come into conflict, often with the Sunnis and the others, and it's a prescription for disaster. But I think that, look, I know what Benjamin Netanyahu would like to do. He would like to resolve this in a very positive way. But right now, he is very much influenced or threatened by his coalition. And I think he has to stand strong. And we're writing him in order to give him support from outside to do the right thing. The one thing I won't write in the letter is do it because it'll make you look good in the world. That's not the reason he wants to do it. Israel should never do anything to look good in the world. It should never refrain from doing anything to not look bad in the world. Israel is always judged by a double standard. Israel should do it because it's the right thing to do. It's the Jewish thing to do. It's the compassionate thing to do. It's the historically correct thing to do. And if it involves a lot of money, we'll raise it. Because we, here in this country, American Jews, strongly support. Now, we don't have the right to make that decision, but we have the right to have our voices heard, and we have the right to let them know that we will stand behind our request to do it by financial support. Look, Israel is not a perfect country. Israel makes mistakes. Israel does things that I wish they could do. Israel has moved too far to the right. For my case, I wish it were more to the center and more to the left. But when you look at the country, surrounded the way Israel is surrounded, I would say there is no country in the history of the world faced with threats of the kind Israel faces, both domestic and external. No country in the history of the world that has had more concern for human rights, more concern for the rule of law, and more concern for the lives of enemy civilians. Is it perfect? No, but it's better than any other country when it comes to those criteria. So I will, to the end of my days, continue to support Israel, continue to criticize Israel, just like I support the United States and criticize the United States, and I will continue to fight against the bigotry of those who single out Israel for condemnation and who apply a double standard and demonize and try to delegitimate the nation state. Thank you all very much. Good night. And thank you so much for your great questions. They were wonderful.
Is there any way for the people that would like to interact with you that you would prefer them to find you online? Is there some place?
Yeah, they can go online and they can email me, and I'll try to respond to the email.
All right, thank you all. Have a good night.